Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today I want to welcome Keith Hunter. Keith is an author and researcher into various esoteric topics, including the placement and function of megalithic monuments, the secret physics underlying nuclear weapons, planetary alignments and earthquakes, and ancient calendar systems used to target the transition points separating world-age cycles. A major focus of his work is decoding mythological and allegorical tales from various sacred writings, revealing their underlying historical, scientific, and spiritual solutions. Keith, how you doing today?
Not bad, not bad. It's good to be here.
Very good. I'd like to start out with a little bit more about what got you started doing this, and then jump into it, but give a brief overview of what you'll be talking about as well.
I've been into what you might call esoteric things for, I'd say, since about 1998-ish, just shortly after I left college. I went into a completely different area. My degree was in the social sciences, so mainly psychology and sociology, but it was almost a chance thing that I bought a copy of Nexus magazine, the Australian publication, and that looked into all of these kinds of topics, you know. And also, I've been a fan of the X-Files from the 90s, so again, UFOs, and that was almost an entry point into it. So it was, you know, looking at these kinds of things, going from UFOs, going into spiritual matters, going into, I suppose you could say ancient aliens, maybe. I think loads of people have seen that documentary as well. But those kinds of shows, you branch off on so many avenues, you know. So I'd like to think I'm aware of all the major conspiracy theories, if you want to put it that way. But one of the main topics I was really interested in was the issue of astronomy. I've always been interested in astronomy, and I had a telescope when I was really young, so that particular area was also interesting. And also, one of my favorite films was Clash of the Titans. So I'm into Greek mythology, and I've got a few books of that, you know, like the Iliad, Homer, and a lot of those stories, again, they're allegorical. They refer to a pantheon of gods, which are represented by planets, and also a kind of celestial upheaval. So, you know, those kinds of stories interested me, and that made me look more at the ancient world. And I was just fortunate that I had a kind of a focus on these two important aspects: astronomy, looking at it from a technical point of view, and also the mythological stories of the Greeks. But also, I had an interest in calendar systems, and one of the first few books that I bought in this area to do with the Mayan calendar systems, and also Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. And again, that's another book that deals with many areas. So I was fascinated by these ideas of the Earth once having 360 days per year as an ideal year. And this seems to be the basis of geometry. And also it's tied in seemingly to certain Greek and Egyptian myths concerning a once ideal year. And again, these all go off in a bit of a tangent into areas of destruction. So a lot of people, for example, looked at the Mayan calendar, the long count, and this was the first book I actually bought. I have it right here, in fact. This one here, 1995, I got this one. And a lot of people were looking at the long count, especially regarding the whole 2012 year, and thinking it's coming to an end with 13 back tons and all that. And this was a really fascinating thing. And I started out with the long count and really trying to crack that one. And I have to say, it's taken nearly 20 years, but I have completely solved the mystery of the long count. That is one of my greatest discoveries, and I fully understand why the Mayans chose the cycles of time they did, like 1 day, 20 days, 360 days, 7,200, 144,000 days. I fully understand why they chose those. and it is true, what people say about the long count, it really was designed to target with high precision a special day, in fact, a series of days, which result in sudden global upheaval because certain special planetary alignments occur on those days. That is correct. But unfortunately, due to a certain error that the Mayans had, the calendar system itself, they made a critical error. And I could even tell you, because I've reconstructed the whole thing, I know that the critical error was made in the year 627 BC. And so they failed to maintain their calendar. They failed to adjust it. And so it ended up being put on a false mapping, targeting this 2012 date, 21st of December, which has absolutely nothing to do with it. And that's one of my major presentations, but I'm going to deal with a few shorter ones. So what I want to discuss here then, this particular presentation, I'm going to talk about world age cycles and the destructive types of effects that we get from them. And these are often put in mythological texts as being, supernatural, but it's pure physics, okay? And even scientists today have observed certain effects in space which, on a greater scale, occur when we have special conjunction patterns. And I'm going to get into identifying some of these patterns because this is the great mystery of it all. A lot of people talk about this Planet X thing, and they look at the works of Zecharia Sitchin, and I have some of his books on my shelf as well. And so they view this idea that we have some object, some significant sized object, and depending on whether you think it's a rocky body or a brown dwarf or whatever, it's in a highly elliptical orbit. It spends most of its time well outside beyond Pluto, but every several thousand years makes a deep penetration to the solar system, gravitationally, electromagnetically, disrupts things, and then goes on out again. And so people think about it in terms of this unknown body thing. And I myself looked into that for a few years. And this was a few years ago, going back about 2011. But I found that Planet X body that is put forward is a fiction, okay? It doesn't exist. There's even an article on my Occult Physics website where I actually analyze what Zecharia Sitchin said and where he comes up with this 3600 number. And he says it's 3600 years. It refers to the orbital period of this body. He got his math misapplied and it was wrong. There is no Planet X like that. Doesn't exist. All of these disasters that we have had periodically, they are actually triggered by planetary alignments, usually four-body alignments, or in some cases, twin conjunction patterns. And one of the most important aspects of this is the direction in the sky. The direction in the sky that the alignments occur in, especially targeting such as the Pleiades star group. And so what I did, I identified these mythological solutions. So for example, in Greek mythology, we've got books like this, for example, Hamlet's Mill. They look at a lot of Greek mythology and they try to figure out how some of the stories of the Greek gods relate to planets and also particular constellations. And Hamlet's Mill, along with some of the work of Immanuel Velikovsky, I have to say I'm stood on the shoulders of giants with these guys because what they did in the 1950s and 60s, they identified certain critical dates when they thought, looking at historical records. Velikovsky, amazingly enough, in his book Worlds in Collision, identifies two precise dates of, you could say, secular observations of people looking up in the sky saying there's something wrong with the planets, there's a weird comet going off, there's fire from the sky. They're giving you all this description and they give you precise dates. Velikovsky, though, unfortunately for him, he was a man of his time. He could not do something that I can do right now. Plug in the PC, bung on an astronomy package, look right down, plug in the date that he identified, and see the alignments that he could not see. I mean, when he did Worlds in Collision, it came out in 1950. Personal computers did not exist. So, with things like, for example, stories about an affair between Ares and Aphrodite, okay? We all generally know Aphrodite, goddess of love, is Venus. Ares, god of war, Mars. There's a story in Ovid's Metamorphoses, this book here. It's also repeated in Homer's The Odyssey as well. It's a story about the sun itself, seeing both of these two gods embrace, right? They make love, and it's an affair because Aphrodite is actually married to some other god, you see. So there's an affair going off, and the sun sees them, in passionate embrace. Well, the sun sees a conjunction. From the center of the sun, you've got Venus moving into alignment with Mars. That's the embrace. So then you're starting to think, okay, if we've got a story, some kind of story, where we've got a conjunction involving Venus and Mars, and it's somehow tied into destruction, we've got the astronomy software. So I started to look. I looked at the astronomy software we had. I started to go back in time to try to figure out if I could actually work out what the precise dates were of some of these destructive alignments. And I managed to identify them. And as a result of that, when I then evaluated the cycles of the Mayan calendars and the Aztec calendars, I realized they harmonized to the intervals between these identified alignments, and it completed the whole system. And it was so elegant. So the relations I'm going to show in this presentation here is some of what I have to say are some of my greatest discoveries over the past few years, where it's really all come together. I mean, I've been working on this since, as I said, the mid-90s. But, sometimes you can be fumbling around in the dark and you only make the critical breakthrough maybe 10 or 15 years later almost. And I just happened in the past couple of years to so many pieces of the puzzle come together. And so I was able to actually deduce some of these dates of these alignments. Some of them I took directly from guys like Velikovsky. Others were from a careful study of the time cycles and looking at some of the geophysical evidence. A lot of the evidence we've got for past destructions, for example, I know a lot of people talk about the end of the last ice age and about 13,000 years ago, they associate that with things like Göbekli Tepe, this site, and the destruction of Atlantis about 9600 BC. Well, I actually found that there is a very specific conjunction pattern which occurs on an irregular cycle using all four inner bodies, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, in a very special pattern. And that's the basis of the Mayan long count system. That's what they're actually targeting with that calendar. And it has an irregular pattern. This pattern occurred right there in 10,964 BC and also in 9612, I think it is 9612 BC. It occurred on both these two, and this is what caused the destruction. One for the disaster at the end of the last ice age, meteor bombardment, a major extinction level event, and the very same conjunction pattern, its next instance occurred 9600 BC, practically dead on. That's associated with the destruction of Atlantis. And so that's the kind of stuff that I'm going to be dealing with today. I want to be showing you, first of all, some of the physical effects that we have. Some of them scientists have observed today. And then I'm just going to show you how this relates to the work of Velikovsky. And then I'm going to get into the calendar solutions and really show you how certain events were determined. And the ones I'm going to concentrate on this presentation are the ones associated with the Bible. So the Exodus mystery. Every man and his dog has practically got an idea on the year when the Exodus occurred. And a lot of people as well even say it was a fiction to begin with, so there's even that. But it really was a real event. And I'm going to give you the precise date because all the plagues associated with it, all caused by an alignment pattern. So we can know it to the day. And it was a dropping off point. It was like an anchor point for determining future conjunctions also of disaster. And it would appear that primitive man, our civilizations going back a few thousand years ago, we were given some very advanced calendar systems, okay, by, well, would you want to go with? Do you want to go with aliens? You can go with a few avenues, but we were given some exceptionally advanced calendar systems to work out and forecast precise days of disaster in the future. And excuse me. These calendar systems then, for the most part, some cultures managed to maintain them correctly. There were other cultures, they made mistakes. I mean, for example, the long count, they started to make mistakes with that. 627 BC is the critical date. I'll give you an example by way, I mean, we all know, for example, of the Earth orbits the Sun, and it's just under 365 and a quarter days, okay? So if we're doing a basic calendar, okay, to track this orbit for the seasons for, say, planting crops, what do? We have our basic 4-year calendar, our leap year system. So we count 3 years of 365 days. The 4th year is 366 days, okay? Because if you add up those 4 years, 365 times 3 plus 366, divide by 4, you get 365.25. Great stuff. Imagine what would happen if we did a leap year system, counted the first 3 years, 365 days, 366 days there, and then we forgot to apply this leap year, and we just kept counting 365-day years continuously. We just like total amnesia, forgot to count that leap year. What would happen is our calendar would go out of sync with the seasonal markers, the solstice and equinox points. It would go out of sync with the Earth's orbit. So if we were wanted to plant our crops by it, the calendar is effectively useless. Okay, so what we had go on with the Mayan long count is that they had their calendar set up. They did correctly use it, right? We've got evidence they correctly used it to target a destructive alignment. But when it came to 627 BC, they should have reset the long count to 0. They should have changed the Aztec calendar round system, paused that for a time. They failed to make these adjustments. They just blindly kept the mapping going. And it's that mapping that incorrectly targets this 2012 date, which is totally meaningless. If their calendar were correctly used, though, they would be on track to target the next instance of this destructive alignment that it was designed to target, which occurs in 2528 AD. But that's another presentation. So what I want to get into now then, I'll do the screen share and begin to look at firstly the destructive effects of comets, okay?
Yes, very good. Very excited to get into this. This is very fascinating stuff. And before you get into that, I just wanted to get your opinion. The ancients' mythology of gods, were the gods actually planets, or do you think that some of them were actual entities that they were dealing with?
You have asked a brilliant question, and it is one I've thought quite a lot about, and there are multiple facets to this, okay? I'll give you a bit of an overview on the Bible itself, and I'm going to be discussing the Bible. So we've got two major parts, Old Testament, New Testament, okay? If you were to ask me, what is the Old Testament telling us? I would say, very broadly speaking, it's history, okay? It is history focused upon a certain special group of people, okay? As it practically opens out with the generations of Adam, okay? Now, I'm not one of these young Earth creationist people, okay? I don't want anybody to believe that, okay? So, for me, the Earth has been populated. It's had lots and lots of people going back, you could say millions of years or whatever. We've had fossil bones you can go with Michael Cremo. Humans have seemingly been around. They've risen and fallen, okay. But in our more recent history then, I think we have always had, periodically, contact with extraterrestrial beings who have had an interest in our affairs. And I do think that there is truth to genetic manipulation of our species. Now, my take on it is the genetic interference or manipulation is alluded to with respect to the significance of this generation of Adam, right? For me, we've got a specific population group, like the ancient Hebrews, and I do think that the references to the, quote, gods, small g, like Yahweh, like a Baal, and is it Molech, or, there's a group, there's a lot of characters mentioned, and there's a certain rivalry given. I do think that the best solution for me is they were extraterrestrials. They were a group of extraterrestrials. They interacted with humanity. One of the key points, regarding these alignments that I'm going to talk about, a fascinating discovery. These alignments, these celestial patterns, they refer to, or they target or produce effects such as they can involve changes to the sun, its energy output. They can involve destructive geophysical effects. The idea of world age cycles being linked into almost naturally DNA type changes or some fundamental shift in qualitative, you could say the spiritual environment of the earth, even the intelligence level of the population. I do believe that there definitely is something in that, and that this is a natural mechanism. But it seems to me that a lot of the stories in the Bible where we have these connections between so-called gods and the people, they occur when these alignments occur. Even the Bishop Ussher, for example, I know he's mocked for saying the entire universe began in 4004 BC. Well, 4004 BC is the year of a very special alignment. There is tied into the beginning of Adam as a being. And I do think that part of the significance of the ancient Hebrews is that they were manipulated genetically and they were given certain long lifespans as a population group. And I think that the interest that this Yahweh character, who seems to have been particularly interested in this group, he always said to them, eat the right foods, eat this, eat that, stay together as a population group, don't marry outsiders, don't have children with outsiders. I think this is all about maintaining the genetic integrity of this group that he was interested in following. Some of the calendar systems, these esoteric systems, were given to the ancient Hebrews. They were also given to the Mayans and the Aztecs, exactly the same cycles. And if you were to ask them, where did they get them from? Do they say transcendent God? No. They talk about like star people and all kinds of things. Like they have a completely different view. So they've got the same knowledge. If you look at the Jewish temples, I'm also going to look at those. They were built at certain special times, the Jewish temples, and the times when they were completed were related to calendar cycles like 360-day years, etc., which are tied in or anchored on these destructive alignments. The Pyramid of Kukulkan, that's one of the Mayan pyramids over in the Americas, that too, scholars have dated it to 832 AD. What they don't seem to realize is that there's a very special day in 832 AD when we have a Jupiter-Venus-Mars alignment right in the Pleiades star group, dead on, and that is when that temple was completed and inaugurated, and it ties in to a destructive alignment a few centuries earlier, which is when we had the beginning of the Dark Ages. So we know that, my own research definitely shows we've got various different ancient population groups. They had some kind of encounters with various beings. They were given advanced calendar systems, same calendar systems given to population groups around the world. For this reason, I do believe that the stories of the encounters between, say, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, with Abraham. I mean, in Genesis, he's walking and talking, and eating bread. Abraham tells his wife to get in the kitchen and get some bread going, bake some bread or something. And so he's literally eating there. And this is when he's got, I think, 2 angels with him, and they go off to see Lot. And then you have the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah shortly after. But, which was caused by a special alignment, by the way. One of the interesting things about these disasters in the way they are described is that these disasters are they're natural, but the way the narratives have been put in the Bible, you'd think that they are almost like acts of will from some God that says, okay, like with Noah's flood, I've just decided all these men, I'm looking down on the earth, they're all pretty evil, I'm going to wipe them out. No, it's a natural disaster, a special alignment that occurs. It's at the Exodus event, the narrative given, it's like the Hebrews, they're in the land of Goshen, okay? And so the narrative is they're being oppressed. Moses goes to see the Pharaoh, says, let my people go. If not, my God, Yahweh, he's going to hit you with all these plagues, okay? But if you let us go, don't worry about it. You'll be fine, It's like a threat thing, like that. It was actually a natural disaster that triggered this disaster in Egypt, and it would have been global as well, all around the world to some extent. And so the real narrative would have been Yahweh goes to see Moses, says, Moses, a great big massive disaster is going to occur. Egypt is going to be exposed. You need to ask the Pharaoh to leave. If he says no, okay, hunker down. When the disaster hits, I'll lead you to safety. There's also another instance where there's this Assyrian king called Sennacherib surrounded Jerusalem. King Hezekiah there, Hebrews, he's like, oh no, we're surrounded, we're about to get wiped out here. And so he prays to Yahweh, and Isaiah comes back with some message and says, don't worry, God has decided to blast Sennacherib's army, laying siege to you. If you read that narrative, it's almost like God was about to do nothing, and then Hezekiah asked, hey, will you help us out? And as if God was thinking, do you know, I wasn't going to do anything, but now you've asked, I'm going to do his army in with a blast from heaven. It's almost written like somebody is intervening and they have a choice. That's not so. It was a natural alignment of the planets which triggered this disaster. So a lot of these disasters, the way the narratives have been put in the Bible, okay, the way that they have actually been written up, you get the impression that there's an interactive being which is causing these disasters, but it's not true. They are all natural. But I do think that this being has given them some calendar systems, given the Hebrews some calendars, and is giving them forewarning. I mean, if I told you tomorrow at, 1500 hours, Central Time US, there's going to be a massive 9.0 earthquake in California or something, and it happened, would you necessarily assume I caused it? No, not necessarily. I might have known it was going to happen, but it doesn't mean I caused it. And so when you look at some of the, again, this is another aspect of the Bible. The Bible encodes, if you will, prophecies, and it encodes some of these special calendar cycles to target certain alignments. So the army of Sennacherib, okay, in the Bible, when it's destroyed, it states his army was 185,000 men wiped out. That's a fake number. If you know the precise date when his army was destroyed, which I'm going to get into, and you go backwards 185,000 days with just another slight adjustment, you end up in the year 1193 BC. A massive comet was sighted in that year, and it's involved with some geophysical evidence, some scientific evidence of some kind of civilization collapse event. In other words, the author is trying to tell you, we had a destructive alignment 185,000 days before Sennacherib's army was wiped out. So it's basically saying, hey, this was a destructive alignment for Sennacherib. I'm going to make up a fictional number for the number of men in his army, but it's coded to say, go back there. That's when we had another disaster. So there's a lot of time cycles in the Bible where you have talk about battles, the size of armies, or we had 3,000 charioteers in this battle. No, it refers to 3,000 days, and it's anchored on a certain critical date. It's all that kind of stuff. So somebody has essentially got, for the Old Testament, broad history. It's the story about the interaction of a specific race of alien beings doing some genetic manipulations. Some of these beings are interested in different, groups, and there's a certain loyalty of one particular group, the Hebrews, to one particular entity, this Yahweh. They tend to show up a lot of the time when these alignment patterns occur because they produce changes in the sun. They seem to naturally produce changes to humanity, broadly speaking. And I think these guys are interested in that. They're interested in the DNA transformation of humanity when these alignments occur. But they're also interested in doing a bit of tinkering around. And so I think that the story of the Old Testament God primarily is he's an ET at Mount Sinai. He comes down in his flying saucer, and he imparts some knowledge about calendar systems to tell them about various future disasters. So I think that that's, broadly speaking, what the Bible is. It's history of ET encounters, destructive alignments, and it's embedded with certain coded mathematics which tells you about some of these time cycles. Now, the parables of Jesus are the same, okay? The life story of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is a construct. The real Jesus was not a public figure, in my opinion. He was a very private person. He's the mastermind behind those stories. So when you've got all these stories about Jesus, he's feeding 5,000 people. He's feeding 4,000 people. There's a young girl. She's on the deathbed. She's 12 years old. There's another woman. She's got issues of the blood. She's ill for 12 years. Issues of the blood, code for lunar eclipse, blood moon. Okay? 12 years, time cycle. It's all tied in. So all of these stories that Jesus talks about, right, they are all linked in to calendar adjustments, anchored on certain critical dates in his own lifetime. And it targets certain special days, and these are the starting point days for setting in motion calendars based upon 360-day years and 3,200-day cycles, and they target a variety of future end-of-age disasters. Some of them are in the 6th century AD, some of them are in the 14th century, there's one in the 16th century, and there's a couple which I believe are very recent as well, now, close at hand.
Keith, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know you have quite a lengthy presentation, and we've got about an hour and a half left. So I know you've got a lot to present. So if you want to go ahead and get in the presentation, we go ahead and start that.
Yep. Okay, then. So what you're looking at here, then, is a comet that was just recently in our solar system. And this was first discovered, as you can see, January the 31st, 1996. It's Comet Hyakutake. Its size, 2.6 miles. That's how big it was. But its tail length, 360 million miles, okay? Now, the Earth's mean distance from the sun is about 93 million miles. So I'm just pointing out that you can get a small object like this with a tail practically 4 times the distance of the Earth's orbit around the sun. This is important when we consider cometary effects in a destructive capacity. Just briefly, a few more things. This is from the Rosetta mission to study a particular comet called 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko. And what they're looking at here is some of the bursts of dust and material coming off the surface of it when it is captured, or the sun itself targets the comet, So it's almost an instantaneous effect. And this can be quite sudden. Here's another image of the same comet, okay? A massive burst here of material flying off the comet's surface. And again, this is overcoming gravity, okay? What you're dealing with here are electromagnetic hotspots, which are blasting off material. And this goes into the electric universe theory. Again, this is some of the things that they look at. Comets are not just dirty snowballs, you see. And when they interact with the sun, there's a charging effect. And so you can get material blasted off. And because electromagnetism is vastly more powerful than gravity, you get material like this jetting off. Here's another one. This is comet P17 Holmes. This is a miraculous one. This is a comet which is just a mile or two across. And what happened then in 2007 is it became the focal point of an expanding sphere of light, a discharge of it, like a plasma discharge, a spherical expanding shell just immediately came, so very suddenly expanded away from it. And it was bigger than the size of the sun, okay? And this is just a small object. So you can see then that we can get some of these effects. And there's also, I looked at some of these, and some of them were linked to alignments in the Pleiades star group, which I'm going to get into. There's certain configurations that can be achieved which trigger exotic effects, even in comets like P17 Holmes. And this leads us to Velikovsky. So Immanuel Velikovsky wrote the book Worlds in Collision, okay? And in looking at this book here, he decided to look at a lot of the ancient myths, and he thought that we had radical disruptions to the Earth's solar system, and that's what triggered these disruptions. And there's an article here just briefly by David Talbot who's looked at some of his work. And one of the things he talked about was the planet Venus once being a comet, and that it was a recent entrant into our solar system, and that round about the 7th and 8th centuries, the planets Venus, Mars, they've been disrupted radically, and they developed temporarily elliptical orbits, and they got close to the Earth before settling, and that this is part of the destruction. And my personal view is, I don't buy any radical alteration to the planets themselves. I think that we can have all of these exotic effects, physical effects that are very destructive, without necessarily assuming the planets have suffered radical alterations to their orbits. In fact, when I show you these precise conjunction patterns going back, if they had have been radical alterations, the conjunction patterns I'm going to show you could not possibly be true. The solar system models we have would all be wrong. But they are correct, these patterns. So Velikovsky's kind of wrong about this, but let me just show you the significance of the cometry aspect to it. This here is a viewpoint of the top down of the solar system, and all the planets go anti-clockwise. So imagine if Venus were to ignite as a comet, and this is what happens when we have special alignments. We have a resonant agitation of the solar system, and planets temporarily develop cometry properties. So Venus here, if you look at the cometry tail I've just shown you, this little image here, Comet Hyakutake was 2.6 miles in diameter. It had a cometry tail 4 times the mean orbit of the Earth from the Sun. The mean distance between Venus and the Earth, or the main distance at conjunction, is only 26 million miles. So if they were to go into conjunction, as you can see, and Venus were a comet, the Earth would plough through its cometry stream. We have had reports in the past about fire in the sky, and Venus, the morning star, erupting, you know. It's all related to Venus developing cometry properties and the Earth passing through its stream, okay? Let's look at my own book here. This is Occult Physics. And you can see all the chapters here. And I want to draw your attention to a particular chapter, The Secret Physics of Gravity. Gravity fields around bodies do not just go with an inverse square law. They're actually established to create ripples because the space itself has resistance. And what you've got with all bodies are they are rotating, and they're also expanding and contracting. The sun's doing this, the Earth's doing this deep within the inner core. So even though we're talking about the rocky body and closing it, that's not expanding, contracting. It's expanding, contracting more subtle forces inside it. And they basically push out space and create certain waveforms, which then, when they reach maximum expansion, maximum compression at their limits, they rebound back. And so you get the incoming waves matching the outgoing waves, creating standing wave patterns of space density. All bodies do this. We ourselves, we have the sun, and all the planets are captured in certain localized gravity well troughs, okay? So let's look at this ancient source here, Berossus and Manetho. Berossus was a 4th century Chaldean, and he served the god Marduk or Bel. And he's famous for this particular passage. Berosus, who interpreted the prophecies of Bel, attributes these disasters, the end of the world and its aftermath, to movements of the planets. And he's so certain of this, he can determine dates for the conflagration and the Great Flood. That is destruction by fire, destruction by water. And he talks about the Earth will burn whenever all the planets, which now have different orbits, converge in Cancer and are so arranged in the same path that a straight line can pass through all their orbs. And there'll be a further great flood when the same planets so converge in Capricorn. Under the sign of Cancer occurs the change to summer, Capricorn the change to winter. These are actually associated with certain constellations, Cancer and Capricorn. They are dangerous directions in the sky. And when you have conjunction patterns established there, you end up with, destructive effects. But let's just tie this in together. This is the Nag Hammadi texts. This contains some of the works of the early Christians. And these are Gnostic texts. They are stories. Some of them involve Jesus, but they're like additional gospels. One of them is called On the Origin of the World. It's a lot of this is linked into what you find with Matthew 24 in the Gospels. Before the consummation of the age, the whole place will shake with great thundering. It talks about the rulers will be sad, the angels will mourn for mankind, the demons will weep over their seasons. And it talks about the sun will become dark, the moon will cause its light to cease, the stars of the sky will cancel their circuits. Now, this business I was talking about regarding gravity well troughs, these are like waveform patterns. When certain special patterns are established in the heavens, then there's an interaction between these gravity waves, okay? They are the music of the spheres. They constitute the music of the spheres. And so when we talk about cancelling circuits, we're talking about these wave patterns interacting with one another in a resonant way, achieving frequency matching, which causes a turbulence to the gravity waves. So what you tend to have then are all the gravity waves going into agitation and all the planets being jostling around and being put under geophysical stresses simultaneously. And this is what it's talking about. The whole place will shake with great thundering. It's all to do with alignment patterns triggering these kinds of special patterns with the waveforms which agitate the solar system. Here's another esoteric text called the Pistis Sophia by G.R.S. Mead, and this is dated to the 3rd century AD. Again, it's another book concerning some of the secret teachings of Jesus. Here, they talk about something called the outer darkness, which is characterized by a dragon swallowing its own tail. And this is like a waveform pattern getting trapped in a perpetual loop. It's intimately tied into resonant agitation. And again, here we have a passage where Mary Magdalene asks Jesus a question: does the outer darkness enter our world? The outer darkness is a realm, a waveform pattern. When we have these special conjunctions, we get waveform patterns transformed into being caught in a loop, so to speak. And this has significance in particular to the sun. So Jesus says, when the light of the sun is outside, he covereth the darkness of the dragon. But if the sun is below the world, the darkness of the dragon abideth as veiling of the sun, and the breath of the darkness cometh into the world in form of a smoke in the night. That is, if the sun withdraweth into himself his rays, then indeed the world is not able to endure the darkness of the dragon in its true form. Otherwise would it be dissolved and go to ruin withal. The sun withdraweth into himself his own rays, captured, effectively reflected back, destructive interference. What you tend to get, essentially, is that the light waves of the sun are transformed as special patterns. They can develop coherency. Instead of being bright white, the sun, it can shift its waves into the red end of the spectrum, and also temporarily, if you will, go dark. This is what's actually happening. It's a physics-based process which occurs when we have certain special patterns, and this is what's being described here. And this is a bit of a summary of all of the effects themselves. As you can see, we've got the geophysical effects, the turbulence of the gravity waves causing seismic activity associated with tectonic plate movements and destruction that way, flooding, movement of waters around. We have the ignition or energetic activation of the inner planets to develop cometary properties like Venus, and the Earth gets caught into the cometary streams of them. Also, we can have significant chunks blast off. This explains why we can get major meteor bombardments seemingly, but other times we just seem to get a brushing of just general small micro fire from the sky type things. Then we have changes to the sun. Light waves develop coherency, sun may change, and it may shift outside the visible spectrum, temporarily going dark. This is what the days of darkness is all about. You can also have the sun's energy output suddenly change, which can cause temperature changes associated with the Younger Dryas effect. So here then we've got the analysis I'm going to do, and I'm going to use Starry Night software and show you some very precise patterns of conjunctions, okay, and precise dates, so you'll be able to check my work if you've got similar software. Just a little point on this. When I discuss all the dates, I'm going to give them as calendar dates, as you can see here on the left, you know, day, month, and year, BC or AD. And also, I'm going to give you the Julian day number. Okay, the Julian day number system is a continuous count of days, where day 0 is set at the 1st of January 4713 BC. And so from there, you just count forwards continuously, or backwards going into minus figures, okay? And a whole number Julian day is always set at 12 noon universal time. So if you deviate from 12 noon, this is where the digits after the decimal point occur. You can see in the bottom example here, bottom right. So when I give you these dates, I'm going to also give you the Julian day number. So if you're using astronomy software, some of it uses a year 0, some of it doesn't. Some of it extends the Gregorian calendar back from 1582. Others use a Julian. There's subtle differences. So if you want to plug in the same dates as I am to see, you can see the Julian day numbers. They'll give you the confirmation as well as the calendar dates. So let's begin then by looking at one of the great events of the Bible, the Exodus event. And this is associated with the plagues of the Bible, okay? The plagues themselves. So we've got the land being covered by dust. We've got pestilence in the air, you know, locusts, changes in, things like that, flying everywhere, heat, hails of fire coming down, the whole works, okay? A lot of people have tried to date the Exodus, and there is a very simple connection that you can make, and it's so simple once you realize that you're looking for some kind of reports of disaster, okay? So in this case then, let me just show you a few articles. This is from the Ancient Origins website. This is just somebody who is, again, they're citing historical records here about a massive comet that was recorded by the Egyptians in the 22nd year of the reign of the pharaoh Tutmosis III, who described it as a brilliant disk, much larger than the full moon, a marvel never before known since the foundation of the land. Even Chinese astronomers talk about it, okay? So here we've got, it occurs in the 22nd year of this guy's reign. When did he reign? Well, Wikipedia to the rescue. They have it nailed, our Orthodox guys. So Tutmosis III then, okay, he was born, as you can see, in the 15th century BC, and his reign is usually dated from 1479 to 1425. But interestingly enough, in Wikipedia they state during the first 22 years of his reign, he was co-regent with his stepmother and aunt. Now, we've just had this report here, 22 years after this guy began to reign, big massive comet sighted. A connection? Yes. I would imagine that that's when the regency, the co-regency ended. It was after this 22 years when the comet was sighted. A massive disruption to Egypt changed the politics as well as the environment. So, if we know that this guy, Tutmosis III, this pharaoh, began his reign in 1497, and we know a comet was seen 22 years later, basically a simple calculation tells us Exodus occurred in the year 1457 BC. Now, this data is absolutely flawless. So all we need to do is plug in the astronomy software, look down at the solar system, and this is basically what I did. Plugged in 1st of January, 1457, and just let the planets do their dance. I went through the entire year until a special conjunction pattern stood out brilliantly. And this is it. This is the Exodus alignment. 28th of March, 1457. And you've got the precise Julian day number right there. And what you've got is an alignment of Mars, the Earth, Mercury, and Venus, okay? And it's a direct alignment. It does not involve the sun. You will tend to find that a lot of these alignments do not, right? A lot of these destructive alignments do not necessarily involve the sun. But again, I specify, four-body alignments can occur quite frequently. But it's all a question of what direction in the sky are they aligned to. In this case, if we position ourselves at the center of Mars and look all the way down the line, we get this. Now you can see how accurate the alignment is. It's optimum to this day, 28th of March, and here we are, aligned with the Pleiades, okay? This is the day of disaster. Now, the Israelites, as they became, once they settled in Canaan, right? The Hebrews, at this time, they led to safety to Mount Sinai, okay, in the aftermath. What happens then is that Yahweh gives them some special calendar systems to target certain future disasters which are going to occur several centuries later. And one of them is in the Bible. The first one I'm going to deal with is the prophecy concerning Amos, okay? And this one here is the celestial upheaval under King Uzziah of Judah, okay? And this occurred in the 8th century BC. Before I just look at the Bible references, though, let's have a look at something Velikovsky says about this, because he talks about it in Worlds in Collision. He says, in the 8th century of the days of Uzziah, king of Jerusalem, there occurred a devastating catastrophe called rash or commotion. Amos, who lived at the time of Uzziah, began to predict a cosmic upheaval before the rash took place. So Amos is saying there's a great big massive disaster going to occur here. Okay, get ready, everybody. I've got it straight from Yahweh, you know. Maybe they were using these calendar systems. Let's have a look then at the Bible, the book of Amos, and get some details. It says here, chapter 1, the words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa. So he's prophesying then concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, 2 years before the earthquake. There's lots of references to fire being sent down to all these different houses. I'm going to send fire to Hazael, Gaza, Tyrus, Teman. I'm going to send fire upon Moab. I'm going to send fire upon Judah, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. So God is kind of saying, I'm going to send fire. It's a natural event, though. It's been written up as if God's like angry with, the Israelites, but it's a natural event. So let's go further. This is a very interesting statement. This is chapter 5. Ye who turn judgment to wormwood and leave off righteousness in the earth, seek him that maketh the 7 stars, the Pleiades, and Orion, and turneth the shadow of death into morning, and maketh the day dark with night, that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. The Pleiades is mentioned several times in the Bible. Here we've got it mentioned with the constellation Orion. So, let's go a bit further. This is where I have to absolutely cite Velikovsky, because Velikovsky looks at some ancient records and he nails the day of disaster, the precise day. This is from Worlds in Collision. The year is 747 BC. This is a direct quote. If the commotion of the days of Uzziah was of global character and was brought about by an extraterrestrial agent, it must have caused some disturbance in the motion of the Earth on its axis and along its orbit. Such a disturbance would have made the old calendar obsolete and would have required the introduction of a new calendar. In 747 BC, a new calendar was introduced in the Middle East, and that year is known as the beginning of the era of Nabonassar. It is asserted that some astronomical event gave birth to this new calendar, but the nature of the event is not known. Now, what is Velikovsky saying here? I need to fill in the blanks. We have in ancient times various different cultures using a 360-day calendar, okay? Now, we know that the length of the Earth year is certainly not 360 days. It's 365 and a quarter days or so, okay? Velikovsky notes that round about the mid-8th century, it appears that people stopped using a 360-day calendar. Velikovsky mistakenly believes that the Earth, in accordance with this disruption, once had an orbit of 360 days, and that was so in 747 BC. And as a result of this disruption, it added on 5 and a quarter days. Not so, not so. What we had was a special calendar of 360 days, which were counting down these cycles, which has nothing to do with the actual Earth's orbit around the sun, but which was targeting the alignment, the disaster alignment. When it was completed, it had reached fulfillment. What you usually do in these situations is you shut the calendar system down. You have a pause and you restart it to target the next alignment. Velikovsky thought that because people stopped using the 360-day calendar mid-8th century, and all we had left was this 365 and a quarter day one, he thinks that was a change in the Earth's orbital period. No, it wasn't. It was just a calendar cycle that reached fulfillment, targeting the alignment it was supposed to. It then needed to be shut down. But let's have a look at some physical evidence. Do we have any evidence of a massive earthquake occurring around about this time? Yes, we do. This is from some science journal here. A magnitude 8 event. Earthquake debris at 6 sites. This is all confined to the Dead Sea Transform Fault Zone, right? That area in the Middle East, in Israel. So they basically looked at this and came up with evidence of a massive earthquake, and they gave some kind of error rate of roughly about 30 years or so, but the evidence points to it occurring, a large regional earthquake about 750 BC. And they go on to say, the Dead Sea Transform Fault likely ruptured along more than 400 kilometers as the ground shook violently for over 90 seconds. The urban panic created by this earthquake would have been legendary. This is no ordinary earthquake. It's tied into broad seismic activity that is going all over the planet because the entire Earth is shaking. But this is just evidence, physical scientific evidence of it occurring there, and we've got the Bible, at least of a localized account of seismic activity there, okay? But we've got a date, and this is where Velikovsky's research comes in. He actually found, looking at some of the traditions in the Americas, okay, Uzziah reigned 789 BC to about 740 BC, okay? In the last few years of his reign, beginning with the day of the commotion, he spent in seclusion, having been pronounced a leper. It was apparently the upheaval in the days of Uzziah that separated the two ages. Time was counted from the commotion in the days of Uzziah. If this conclusion is correct, the upheaval took place in 747 BC. The computation according to which the era started on the 26th day of February must be re-examined in light of the fact that further cosmic disturbances occurred during the decades that followed. And he notes, it is worth noting, however, that the ancient inhabitants of Mexico celebrated their new year on the day which corresponds in the Julian calendar to the same date. The first day of their year was the 6th and 20th day of February. So if the first day of this new calendar was the 26th of February 747 BC, the last day is the 25th of February, the final day of the age. What Velikovsky could not do, I am going to show you right now. He could not look at the solar system from a top-down view on the date in question that he had identified. If he could, he would have seen the following. A direct four-body alignment. Earth, Venus, Mars, and Ceres. Now, Ceres is a small dwarf planet in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It's only about 600 miles in diameter. Our own moon is about 2,160 miles, so Ceres is, smaller than that. But Ceres is a proper spheroid body in the asteroid belt. and it is composed of, or makes up, 1/3 of the entire mass of the belt. All the other bits are jagged edge pieces of rock, okay? Ceres is by far the biggest. It's like a proper spheroid body, okay, a true planetoid. Now, I will say this much. If you want to look at Ceres, you may have to manually program it into your astronomy software package, and you've got to use a particular solution, okay? And this is the one that you've got to use. The JPL guys identified this solution here, and this was the best one. They have since degraded it and used an inferior one, so it doesn't show up where it's supposed to. But if you use this solution here and manually program it into your software, you will find Ceres is aligned with so many of these destructive events. And this solution is the supreme solution. It's a shame JPL thought they'd come up with a better one and modified it, but you've got to use this solution. So that's the solution used to see this four-body alignment. But here's where we get to the tie-in to the disaster alignment, or rather the elements of the Bible, the book of Amos, okay? So let's have a look then all the way down the line here for this alignment, okay, from the viewpoint of the Earth. And if we do, here's what we see. We're at the center of the Earth here, and if we look just over to the right, there's the alignment, Ceres, Venus, and Mars. Ceres is a lot lower, below the ecliptic. This green line here is the ecliptic, which is the Earth's orbital plane, okay? But in longitude-wise, they're right on top of one another practically, okay? So this is what you see. You can even see from the Earth is aligned with the Pleiades, Uranus, and Neptune very closely, and even the moon is here. Now, if you were to position yourself at the center of the sun, you know, and look to the Pleiades, Uranus and Neptune would be right on top of one another and very much in line with the Pleiades itself. It's just slightly angled as it is, diagonally, if you will, from the viewpoint of the Earth as seen. But everything becomes clear when we turn on the constellations, okay? This is amazing. This is what we see if we turn on the constellations. This is the constellation of Orion. And remember what it said in the book of Amos. Seek him who identifieth the Pleiades and Orion, and maketh the Pleiades and Orion. The Pleiades are right here. Orion constellation. If you take, and you'll find this is very interesting about the constellations, certain critical stars in them target planets when they're engaged in these destructive alignments. In this case, the straight line from Betelgeuse through to Pi Orionis, which is this tip star here on the shield, the outermost star, the straight line from these two stars extended onwards practically touches Ceres dead on this day. And that same star there, if you connect it up to the Pleiades, it cuts right through and aligns with both Uranus and Neptune. An astounding thing. Oh, bear in mind, guys, officially, we didn't detect Ceres until 1801, okay, just about 200 years ago, because it's such a small body and we needed telescopes to see it because it's so small, even though it's in the asteroid belt and quite near. And we only discovered Uranus and Neptune in the 18th and 19th centuries. So we're talking about a configuration here which seems to tie together planets which officially we didn't know existed at the time in ancient times. But you get these amazing relations, okay? So if that's the case then, did the Israelites know about this alignment in advance? Yes. At Mount Sinai, Yahweh gave them some special calendar systems. He gave them at least two that I'm going to get into just here. And this is the first one. So here we are then, King Uzziah. This is the target, 747 BC. The Exodus event was the anchor point that was used to actually target this event. So what you tend to find with a lot of these calendar systems, they make use of cycles like 360 days in an unbroken count, just continuously counting units, you know. And sometimes you can get a perfect harmonization between one destructive alignment and another one, and it's an equal number of 360-day cycles, for example. But a lot of the time, you have to have a special adjustment date, okay? You might have to pause and have a special count before you start counting your 360-day calendar. In this case, they actually had an adjustment of 96 days. Now, I realize I'm only giving you one example of it here. 96 days is used as a special adjustment count in the long count and in quite a few other calendar systems as well, and multiples of 96 days. I'm only giving you this one instance, but what they did basically was this. Their precise instruction from Yahweh at Mount Sinai. They would have been told to count from the Exodus alignment itself 96 days. This takes you to what we know as the 2nd of July, 1457 BC. Then you start counting cycles of 360 days. How many do you count? 720. There's a number, 720 is 2 times 360, okay? Interesting. But you count precisely 720 cycles of 360 days. And if you do that, you flawlessly target the 25th of February, 747 BC, okay? You're going on track to target the precise day of the alignment. And when you do, you shut down the calendar, it's reached fulfillment, okay? So that's what you're doing here, okay? Now, that was one example of one disaster that occurred 747 BC. And we went from the Exodus to it. Another disaster was the following. The Israelites were also given a calendar to target a disaster which took place 60 years after the Amos earthquake. That is, in 687 BC. And this is associated with the story of the destruction of Sennacherib's army, which I mentioned previously. This is from the book of Isaiah. So Isaiah then, okay, book of Isaiah, chapter 36. Came to pass, 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib of Assyria has basically got his army and they're ready to march on Jerusalem, surrounding the whole place. Doesn't look good. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. Is God going to, bail them out? Is Yahweh going to help them out here? And Isaiah said, yep, pretty much, yeah. Thus shall you say unto your master, thus saith the Lord, be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him. He shall hear a rumour and return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. And the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians, and 185,000, that is 185,000 men, were all destroyed. Basically, there's a blast from heaven, and it wipes out the entire army. And also, it goes on to say, behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which has gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backwards. So the sun returned 10 degrees by which it was gone down. And we attribute this to mean that there's some kind of disruption to the axial rotation of the Earth, okay? It speeds up and slows down first and then speeds back up. Again, a more general effect here. So we've got something, and I would imagine it's some kind of blast from material off of maybe Venus or Mars or even the sun. But you've got material triggered, flying through space. The Earth has made contact with it. And this is what we talk about in terms of the blast from heaven, fire from the sky. And it's also associated with some seismic activity. Okay, so let's just have a look further. Now, there's a lot of people out there done work looking at the work of Velikovsky. And I saw some guys doing a presentation, and this is one of their slides. I'm just ripping it off a bit, They showed some slides where they were looking at all, analyzing all the different elements of the Exodus account. And they mentioned something here, and I noted this. And when I saw this, I thought, this is a very interesting statement. So what they're talking about is the Exodus disaster has occurred, and they say, well, here we go, 3 days after the third new moon following their departure, when they left Egypt, there were thunder and lightning and the sound of a trumpet blast, and the Lord came down on Mount Sinai, and the heavens did bow, and the earth did shake. According to Hebrew tradition, all nations heard the roaring of the law-giving that heralded the start of the seventh world age. It says W in C part 1. That's worlds in collision. Now, because we know the exact day when the alignment occurred, which is what I've shown you, we can evaluate this third day of the third new moon. We can work out precisely when it is. And we can even reconstruct the precise instructions that Yahweh gave to the Israelites to actually target this new destruction. So when it talks about the heralding of the new world age, what it's actually talking about here is this is the moment that they started a calendar system to track time, to cover this new world age. The Exodus alignment was the end of a world age. These other disasters are going to mark other world ages. So let's have a look at this third day of the third new moon. A new moon is when the moon is in between the sun and the earth, so it's in silhouette, okay? The Exodus alignment was on the 28th of March, 1457. So I've gone forwards to the precise day, whole number day, as accurate as possible, for the third new moon. And we're on the 7th of July. So if we just go forwards another 3 days here, the moon just goes a bit further here. This is the third day after the third new moon after Exodus. When they've got to this point here, they're going to set in motion a calendar system, okay? And Yahweh is going to tell them how to target the destruction of Sennacherib's army, right? So, let's have a look. The first thing is then, we have gone forward 104 days, okay? Do we start counting a calendar system straight away? No. We need a special adjustment count. Even from this date here, this third day of the third new moon is an anchor point to say we need to start counting a special number of days before we begin a proper calendar cycle. In this case, we're going to count 216 days exactly, which is 6 times 6 times 6 days. And this gets us to the 11th of February, 1456. That will have been exactly how Yahweh told Moses to count this special adjustment. He won't have just said, Moses, count 216 days. He will have made an absolute point to say, you count 6 times 6 times 6 days, which is 216 days to be sure. But it's all a clever mnemonic. Just like it's the third day following the third new moon, it's 6 times 6 times 6 days for the adjustment. So, once they've done this, what calendar cycle do they set in motion? Well, they set in motion exactly the same calendar cycle that was used in the Americas by the Aztecs and the Maya. And this is the 819-day count. Now, over in the Americas, when our scholars went over there beginning last couple of hundred years ago, they came across all these ruined stones, and they managed to deduce certain calendar cycles, and one of them was an 819-day count. So they have these stone pillars, they've got multiples of 819 days there, and now scholars don't know what it means, but they know they're using this calendar cycle. This is a very special world age ending alignment cycle, and you set it up at certain critical times to target certain alignments, and this is exactly what happened with the Israelites. Just as the Mayans were using it at various points, the Israelites themselves, right, at Mount Sinai were using it. Yahweh gave them this knowledge. So here's what he said to them. They've just counted 6 times 6 times 6 days, 216 days, okay? And this is from the third day of the third new moon. So we are precisely 320 days from the Exodus alignment. It is at this point that we set in motion the 819-day calendar. And I'm sure you've all heard the joke about what is every Jew's favorite number? It's the number 7. And I even heard a rabbi say jokingly, he said, just multiply everything by 7 and it all makes sense. It was a weird joke. I smiled because he was absolutely correct. You see, when Yahweh says to Moses to begin counting cycles of 819 days, what is the precise instruction that he gives? How many cycles does he tell Moses to count? Well, he tells him to count 7 times 7 times 7 cycles of 819 days. And if you add all that up, it's 280,917 days. And if you count that precise number of days from the 11th of February, you arrive the 23rd of March, 687 BC. This is the precise day when Sennacherib's army is destroyed, and a very special conjunction pattern occurs on this day. So here it is. This is the precise alignment. It's two alignments occurring simultaneously. Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, and Jupiter, the Sun, and Ceres, okay? Now, if we position ourselves at the center of Jupiter and look down the line, we see something else of interest. Pleiades star group. We're at the center of Jupiter here. There's the Sun and there's Ceres. There's the alignment, one of the dangerous directions in the sky. Just like the Exodus alignment itself was a destructive alignment targeting the Pleiades. So one of these alignments is in line with the Pleiades, and Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, okay, they're offset to the side there. This is what caused the disaster. But guys, we don't need to guess, and you don't need to take my word for it. In fact, you don't even need to take the Bible's word for it. We have secular records. Secular Chinese records of observations going back to this very date, and this is what Velikovsky uncovered, where they point to this very day and talk about all the unusual activity in the solar system. Here's from Worlds in Collision. He's talking about the army of Sennacherib being destroyed then. And he goes on to say, for a more exact date for the night of the annihilation of Sennacherib's army, from modern research we know it was in the year 687 BC. The Talmud and Midrash give another valuable clue. The destruction occurred during the first night of Passover. The giant host was destroyed when the people began to sing the Hallel prayer of the Passover service. Passover was observed about the time of the vernal equinox. Then he goes on to talk about a guy who was looking at certain Chinese records, Eduard Biot, I think. And it says right at the bottom, the year 687 BC, in the summer, in the fourth moon, in the day Sin Mao, it's Chinese, 23rd of March, during the night, the fixed stars did not appear, though the night was clear. In the middle of the night, stars fell like rain. To go further, the date, the 23rd of March, is Biot's calculation. The statement is based on old Chinese sources ascribed to Confucius. In another translation of the text, though, it states, though the night was clear, a star fell in the form of rain. The annals of the bamboo books obviously refer to the same event when they inform us that in the 10th year of the Emperor Kui, the 17th emperor of the dynasty Yu, or the 18th monarch since Yahoo, quote, the 5 planets went out of their courses. In the night, stars fell like rain. The earth shook. In the night, stars fell like rain are the same as in the record of Confucius dealing the cosmic event of the 23rd of March, 687 BC. That alignment pattern was a destructive configuration, causing massive seismic activity, and it was also associated with, and I can't go into it here because it's another presentation, but there's the Greek mythological story about the death of Phaethon, being struck by the thunderbolt of Zeus, his glowing hair, his locks aflame, he falls to his death in the river Eridanus. The myth of Phaethon is this very same day, the 23rd of March, 687 BC. Ceres ignites to develop a cometary tail. Ceres is Phaethon, and it's the same disaster right here. So that's the alignment pattern right here then. Now this is where things get very interesting. We're now going to go to the New Testament, and you're going to see some astounding connections here. So let's go to Crucifixion Day, okay? Now, Crucifixion Day is the most significant day associated with Jesus. This day is an end-of-age day. This is an end-of-age special alignment day when we had all kinds of exotic physical effects going off on earth and in heaven. Jesus knew all about the Crucifixion Day, and when he was saying to people, the kingdom of heaven is near, get ready, this generation will live to see it all, you lot, the people he's talking to, he was talking to the people right in front of him. He was saying, get ready, we're going to have an end-of-age alignment. Much like Amos was prophesying this big earthquake to occur a few years before it happened, Jesus is saying the same thing. It's what Crucifixion Day is all about. Now, we can deduce from the Bible that Jesus fully understood how to target Crucifixion Day. And this he did quite ingeniously. This is the 23rd of March, 687 BC then, okay? And you can see it says the kingdom of heaven is near, right? So title it here. This is the death of Phaethon stroke Sennacherib army destroyed, as I just alluded to. There's the precise Julian day number, and there's the date. So, how do you target crucifixion day end of age alignment from this? You use the 360-day calendar, right? So the 360-day calendar was shut down in 747 BC. It had reached fulfillment. But what you can do here, you restart it, you repurpose it to target the crucifixion day alignment. So, do you start counting straight away cycles of 360 days from this date here? No. You need a special adjustment. And what is the adjustment? Well, astoundingly, 6 times 6 times 6 days. That's right, 216 days. You count 216 days from the alignment, and this gets you to the 25th of October, okay? When you're here, then you start to count cycles of 360 days. How many do you count? Here's where the clever mnemonics come in. You count precisely 9 times 9 times 9 cycles of 360 days. Astounding. This gets you to the 3rd of May, 33 AD. Is this crucifixion day? No. And here's the genius of it. You need one further correction backwards to target crucifixion day. Now, we've all heard the story of Judas betraying Jesus. Okay? Did he really? Not really. It's allegorical. It's a fantastic fiction, if you will. Judas, as the story goes, betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Now, in terms of astrology, we all know that the sun is gold. The sun is golden. But the moon is silver. When you're on the 3rd of May, 33 AD, you're on a full moon, interestingly enough, bright silver. The 30 pieces of silver is referring to the length of a moon month. Just like we have an ideal year of 360 days, there's an ideal moon month of 30 days. The final instruction is to go back 30 days, which is the Judas month. Now, when you get money that you're paid money for, okay, to kill somebody, we usually refer to this as blood money, don't we? And the color of blood is red. When we go back 30 days, we happen to drop on a lunar eclipse, a blood moon. And the date in question is the 3rd of April, 33 AD. This is Crucifixion Day, and this is the special alignment day, okay? And also, if you plug this date, 3rd of April into 33 AD, into a Hebrew calendar, you'll also find it's 15 Nisan, which is Passover Day. Again, this ties in with certain Bible sources, right? On the Julian calendar, 33 is the year, 3rd of April, 15 Nisan, 3793, okay? Before we get to that, we need to look at a very special guy who helps us with this story. So I want to introduce you to this guy here. Now, this is a ram, okay? And rams are male sheep. And lambs, you got ewe lambs and ram lambs. And they are young sheep. And now we've sorted that out, let's have a look at another lamb. The Lamb of God. And this is a painting from 1432 by Jan van Eyck. And it's basically adoration of the mystic lamb. And you can see here then, that it's all about, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is what John says when he first sees Jesus. Christian doctrine holds that divine Jesus chose to suffer crucifixion at Calvary as a sign of his full obedience to the will of his divine Father as an agent and servant of God. In Christian theology, the Lamb of God is viewed as foundational and integral to the message of Christianity. Now you can see in this picture, oddly enough, you've got the sun here, you've got the dove, and you've got right here the lamb, and it's got a wound in it, and it's pouring blood into this chalice, and you've got the crucifixion here, the cross being held, and you've got all these angels. This is a scene for the Lamb of God on Crucifixion Day. So let's have a look at the moon first of all. We're at the center of the earth, got all the constellations here, 3rd of April 33 AD, and you look to the moon, bright silver. Now, we have a lunar eclipse here, but because we're on precisely 12 noon UTC, you can't see it. So if we just make a slight adjustment of a few hours, we get here. We've just gone forwards 2 hours, 51 minutes. The moon becomes red, okay? Because right behind the earth is the sun, and it's blocked out, causes the moon to go red. If we position ourselves at the center of the moon and look at the earth, we will see the Lamb of God. And this is it. Aries, the ram, the lamb. It's the constellation Aries. That is the Lamb of God, okay? Now I've drawn in silhouette here, the earth. The sun, I've labeled it, but you can't see it because it's behind it. And this is the pattern then from the center of the moon. This is what we are looking at right here. And you can see 4 stars of the constellation Aries. And this is the precise time of the optimum red lunar eclipse. And what is so astounding about it is this. At this particular moment, from the center of the earth, the straight line distance to Hamel, and also center of the earth to Sheraton, 2 stars associated with the head of the lamb, the angular sweep practically the same, 9 degrees, 16 minutes of arc, almost identical, equidistant. You will see special relationships of this type on some of these alignments. They're very clever. So this again is when we talk about Jesus, the sacrificial lamb, he's wounded, you know, this is tied into the Aries constellation and what we have configured here from the viewpoint of the moon, the lunar eclipse, okay? But it gets better. This is a destructive alignment day. Yes, we've got an alignment of an eclipse, but what is going on in the wider solar system? This is where we really seal the deal. Let's look at the top-down view on the same day. Here we are, location above the sun, and what do we have here? We've got an alignment of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, and then separately Jupiter, Ceres, the sun, and Mercury. Well, if we actually position ourselves at the center of Jupiter and look down the line, we can even see something else of interest. Pluto is a part of the alignment. So you've got one alignment going off here, and you've got separately another one because we're at the center of Jupiter, so Jupiter's aligned to these 4 bodies here, and Jupiter's separately aligned to Mars and Venus, okay? So just go from a top-down view again. Jupiter, Ceres, Sun, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Now, the thing about conjunction patterns is certain patterns are quite destructive. And so if you see those same patterns again, or maybe slightly varied, you tend to get similar destructive effects, okay? Let's have a look at this pattern right here and compare it to the 687 destructive event that I just showed you previously, side by side. Here they are. This one in the top is the 23rd of March, 687 BC. And we have Jupiter, Sun, Ceres, Jupiter, Venus, Mars. This is Crucifixion Day. What do we have? Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Ceres, Sun. All the same objects are involved. It's just that the order is switched. When you consider the elegant mathematical targeting, the Judas month, the 30-day movement back, the blood moon, okay, tied into the Lamb of God. The mathematics is beautiful. The same kind of pattern which is linked into 687 BC. There can be no doubt. The 3rd of April 33 AD absolutely was Crucifixion Day. But what happened on that day? Well, let's have a look at a nice little resource here. The Testimony of Phlegon, vindicated, an account of the great darkness and earthquake at our Saviour's Passion. It's kind of all the rage, it's the fashion today to actually pretend that when the crucifixion event occurred, all these reports that we hear about how the sun went dark and there was massive shaking of the ground, we're supposed to pretend that all that was fantasy and it didn't really happen. But the truth of the matter is, it absolutely happened. It's just that modern day scholars and what have you like to pretend it's all myth, okay? They like doing that kind of thing. And so here you've got a guy here who's actually going over all the evidence and, he's just discussing it. We know it happened. And if you look at the character of the disasters from 687 BC and the 33 AD one, it's a similar kind of pattern, but the ordering is reversed, as I said. But we have this lunar eclipse going off on Crucifixion Day. I think that is why we had this day of darkness, where the sun, for like 3 hours at midday, cancelled its light waves, just like Jesus said in the Pistis Sophia. That is, if the sun withdraweth back unto himself, his rays, it goes dark, the sun. So that's what actually happened temporarily. And this is associated with that seismic shaking activity of the solar system. Okay? Whereas when we look at the 687 BC one, I think we've got more blasts from like cometary, the planets, like Comet P17 Holmes, how it flares up. We get those blast effects like that, electromagnetic hotspots blasting material off. And I think the Earth felt some of that, right? It was carried through space and the Earth felt some of that. And I also think that we can even think about formations of such effects in the Earth's own atmosphere simultaneously. When we think about fire from the sky, it's not just material from other planets hitting the Earth. It can also be effects generated in the Earth's own atmosphere, because it too has these cometary properties almost subtly developing, to a certain extent. But we had all of these exotic effects occurring then. And this is what made the Crucifixion Day a bona fide end of age alignment. And of course, what makes Jesus the Jewish Messiah, because he heralds the new age, hence Messianic age, Messiah. Now, what we're going to turn to is a bit of a new topic here, because what I've been talking about are planetary alignments and the cycles that are used to track time to target them. But you also find the same mathematics is used to track time related to geopolitical events to do with the rise and fall of civilizations, that kind of thing. And this is where we're getting to a certain destiny sort of thing, okay? Because we often hear about civilizations, rising and falling according to divine, decree almost. And there definitely is something to it. And so I'm going to look now at the two most important historical structures linked to Israel. That is the first and the second temple. The first temple is Solomon's temple. And again, a lot of people have tried to figure out when exactly was this built. Well, I'm going to show you when it was built, when it was destroyed. I'm going to show you when the second temple was built and when that one was destroyed as well, and the calendar cycles which tracked their lifespan. So let's look at some Bible references. I've already shown you that when we were at the Exodus alignment, we used a 360-day calendar to target this disaster in 747 BC. And we needed a 96-day correction before we started counting it. Well, a critical reference that allows us to work out when Solomon's temple began construction is the Bible. And again, it's anchored on the Exodus. And it came to pass, and this is 1 Kings 6, in the 480th year after the children of Israel were to come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziv, or Ziph, which is also Ayah. And by the way, guys, I don't know foreign languages. If I screw up all these pronunciations here, just roll with it, okay? So basically, we've got the this particular month here, Ziph or Ayah, which is the second month, okay, that he began to build the house of the Lord 480 years after Exodus, okay? In this case, we just counted straight out 480 years, and we get right there to the 4th of May, 984 BC, which is day 3, month Ayar, the very month they spoke of, okay? This is when work commences. Let's have a look at completion. After 20 years, it came to pass that Solomon had built 2 houses, house of the Lord and the king's house. And he had this deal going with this guy, Hiram. And it says here that Hiram, the king of Tyre, furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees and with gold. And that King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities. You'll see I'm putting a lot of special numbers in red. These are all coded aspects to the story. And it goes on to say that Hiram sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Now, what this is basically saying in a very coded way is that 480 years after Exodus, it takes 20 years to build the temple. But these are not 365 and a quarter days. These are these ideal years of 360 days, okay? Very important. So when the 20 years are up, the reference here makes reference to 2 things: 2 houses and also the number 120. They're basically telling you, to the discerning reader, that there's something very significant about 2 days after Solomon's temple is completed, and also 120 days after it's completed. And both of these are actually times when you set in motion 360-day calendar systems. Let me just show you the first reference, though, with respect to this 120 talents of gold. It's actually representative of 120 days. So Solomon's temple begins 480 years after Exodus. 20 years later, we are here, 19th of January, 964 BC. If we go forwards 120 days, okay, then we end up here, 19th of May. Is there anything special about this day? Oh yes, let's have a look at the solar system. A top-down view, amazingly, we just happen to have one of those amazing conjunctions of Jupiter, Sun, Venus and Mars. Very nice and accurate, right on this day. Also, if we position ourselves at the center of the Earth and look to the Sun, we have a new moon. Now that is an utterly astounding configuration right there, 120 days after Solomon's temple is completed. I don't want to go into the significance of that just yet, but let's just go back to the other one. The other reference was 2 houses of the Lord. And this is basically saying there's something significant 2 days after Solomon's temple is completed. Well, the significance here is, this is when you set in motion a 360-day calendar cycle. And you are going to count a very precise number of such ideal years, terminating at the precise day when the temple is destined, by divine destiny, you might say, to be destroyed. Let's have a look, though, at the day of destruction. Let's deduce it first before we get there. Here's Wikipedia, and here's what we know about both temples, the first and second, right? What happened was, Solomon's temple was destroyed in 586 BC, this date right here, okay? And then about 70 years later, in 516 BC, the second temple was completed. And that second temple lasted until 70 CE, which is the same as AD, okay? So, we know these dates here, and these dates under the Julian calendar are flawless. We know what they are. But what about isolating the precise dates? We've got the years. In order to get the dates, we need a few Bible references. And we also need to know a certain special Jewish tradition. This is something that every Jewish person knows. Tisha B'Av. This is a date associated with the destruction of both Solomon's temple, the first temple, and the second temple. As it states here, the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av is day 9 of month Av. It's an annual feast day in Judaism on which a number of disasters in Jewish history occurred, primarily the destruction of both Solomon's temple and the second temple by the Babylonians and the Romans, okay? let's look at one other reference. What about the completion of the second temple? According to this reference here in Ezra 6, the temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. This is in 516 BC, okay? If we know what the Julian years are, and we know what the Hebrew day and month dates are, you put them into a calendar converter, you get the following. I've added in at the top the date I've already given for Solomon's temple being completed, 19th of January, 964 BC. That's the first one. If we go with the 586 BC and we go for 9 of Av, that translates into 3175 on the Hebrew calendar, 16th of July, Julian. And again here, if we go for day 3, month Adar, with 516 BC, it fills in for the 18th of February in 3245 for completion of the second temple. And destruction again is on day 9, month Av. And this is 3830 on the Hebrew calendar, which corresponds to 70 AD, 3rd of August. Okay, so these are the Julian day numbers. These 4 dates you have on screen here, guys, are utterly flawless, I assure you. They are perfect. We're going to get into it. Here we are then. Solomon's temple has just been completed. 500 years exactly. 500 ideal years after Exodus. So what do? We do that special 2-day count for the 2 houses of the Lord. It is at this day then that we set in motion a 360-day calendar. And we count precisely 384 cycles, which is in fact 4 times 96 as a number. So 384 years. If we count that, we get all the way down to exactly 9 Av 3175, 16th of July 586 BC, the very date I've just shown you for the destruction of Solomon's temple. The temple was destined to be destroyed on that particular day, okay? Destined to be destroyed. What we have, just like we have world age cycles, broadly speaking, on disaster alignments, we have like civilization type cycles. And in this case, linked into what is the most important building associated with the Jewish people, their temple. The age of their temple is tied into their reign, if you will. And they have this precise way of determining it. It was 384 years plus 2 days. Then it came to an end. Going further then, I want to draw your attention to Ezra 8. This is just talking about a particular passage. Again, this is related to getting the second temple built, okay? And they're talking about some guys assembled at a canal for 3 days, okay? And all these people are all showing up, you know, they're all going to be involved with the temple, this new one. And it goes on to say, and I'm not going to name them all, but we've got the magic numbers here, 18 people here, and another 20. And then it also says, and they also brought 220 temple servants, a body that David and the registered officials had established to assist the Levites. These numbers are all special numbers in this story. There are calendar adjustments associated with targeting the completion of the second temple, okay? So here we go then. Solomon's temple's been destroyed, 16th of July 586 BC. The second temple is going to be completed here then, 3 Adar 3245, which is also about 70 years afterwards. Here's what we do though. There's the Exodus alignment right here. That gets us there. We then target that, okay. That's the day when it is destroyed. So if it's destroyed here then, what do? The 220 temple servants are a 220-day calendar adjustment. There we go. That takes us there. We then count precisely 70 years, exactly. That's 70 ideal 360-day years. And this takes us to the 3 Adar 3245. Precise date, as I've just shown you in that table, when the temple was completed. Now, we are going to do the same thing as before. There's a destiny to this temple, a lifespan. And the Jewish people are going to track time using a 360-day calendar right up until the day it is destroyed, okay? Right up until the precise day it is destroyed. Do they start counting or even continue to count this 360 days straight out once they've got to this 3 Adar date? No, they need a little adjustment. The adjustment is 3 days. That's why there's those guys camped at the canal for 3 days. You go backwards 3 days in this case, it's a little overlap. You start counting the calendar cycle to track the lifespan of the temple 3 days before it's completed, okay? And once you do that, and you start counting your 360-day years, 594 cycles takes you all the way to the very day that it is destroyed, 3rd of August, 70 AD, which is 9 Av 3830, okay? Now, here's where we're going to get into a certain Jewish tradition associated with, it's going to have a lot of controversy, this Jewish people, oh, you might not like this one. It's brilliant, this solution, but it ties into Jesus in a way which, because obviously Jewish people don't believe in Jesus, if you know what I'm saying, they don't believe he was the Messiah. But it appears that he was, at least mathematically. The evidence is in his favor. Okay, so let's have a look at a certain controversy. You see, I've just told you here that this temple was created. You know, the second temple was established in 516 BC. The mathematics is solid on this, okay? There's a rabbinical tradition, though, that says it was not created or built in 516 BC. It was actually completed in the mid-4th century BC. And let's have a look at this. This is to do with something, what's called the missing years controversy, okay? So here is a website, chabad.org, and they're a very orthodox website that really go into the rabbinical tradition on this point, right? So they totally believe that the temple was not completed in 516 BC. And this is because of a certain special number. There's a certain tradition that they are pointing towards, and what they say is the following, okay? It basically says here, in 353 BC, exactly 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, again, they even disagree with that, the Jews began building again, at first independently, but King Darius soon ratified their effort. The second temple was completed in 349 BC, under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah. The community in Judea became vibrant and secure. And then it goes on to say, the second temple era lasted 420 years, ending with the Romans' destruction of the Holy Temple in 70 CE. Now, we agree then, me and these guys that wrote this article, we agree the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, okay, or CE, Common Era, Anno Domini, whatever. We agree on that. But what I'm saying is, and the Orthodox, again, this view of 516, it's not just my view, this is like the main Orthodox viewpoint. This rabbinical tradition is actually quite obscure. You know, it's not the dominant position at all. But these guys here, they think that the second temple was completed in 349 BC, not 516 BC. And it lasted 420 years. So if you've got 70 AD, and you go back 420 years, you get to 349 BC. The slight discrepancy, the reason why it's not 350, it's all to do with whether you include a year 0 or not, okay? But they've got 349 BC, okay? And they're really looking at the special significance of this 420 years. That's what they think the temple era is, according to some pretty esoteric tradition. Now, there is something very special about this 420 years. But this calculation on screen that you're seeing here is completely flawed. We are not talking about years of 365 and a quarter. So this basic calculation this guy does, going from 70 AD to 349 BC with just straight out 420 standard years, that's not what you're doing. You've got to go back 420 precise cycles of 360 days, these ideal years. Then everything becomes clear. And this proof is utterly decisive. So here we are then. We all agree. Again, Jewish tradition Even the rabbinical guys from that site agree it was destroyed 9 Av in the year 70 AD. So me and the guys that wrote the article, we totally agree. It was the 3rd of August 70 AD, which is corresponding to 9 Av 3830 under the Hebrew calendar. We are absolutely in agreement, okay? So if we go back 420 years precisely to the day, we will decisively reveal the significance of what this is all about. 420 times 360 is 151,200 days. And if we go back, we drop on this precise date here, 16th of August, 345 BC, which under the Hebrew calendar is 4 Elul 3416. Now remember, the temple under the Bible reference was supposed to be created at 3 Adar. That's not 3 Adar. So this is the wrong date. This is not when the temple was actually created or completed. It's actually associated with a prophecy concerned with its destruction. And what does the prophecy hang upon? Well, now we've got this precise date, 16th of August, 345 BC. Let's have a look at the solar system from a top-down view.
Now, just so you know, Keith, we've got a little over 10 minutes left.
Yep. We're on course, actually. I'm very close to finishing.
Okay.
Yep, so you can see here, guys, we've got 2 alignments offset. We've got Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, Jupiter, Ceres, and the Sun, and also Mercury. Does this look familiar? Well, we're actually looking at this, by the way, from below the Sun, okay? Just for a mirror. It's not a top-down view. It is a plan view, but from below. But that's exactly what we've got. So let's have a look at it from the perspective of Jupiter. Look how accurate the Venus-Mars alignment is. Spot on. And then we've got Ceres right here aligned with Mercury and the Sun. Beautiful alignment. This is nailed to the day, okay? Nailed to the day, right? So here we are. This is the alignment again, looking at the plan view. Does this look familiar? Let's compare it to Crucifixion Day. There you have it. This is Crucifixion Day. And this is 420 cycles backwards from the destruction of the temple. We've got Jupiter, Ceres, Sun, Mercury. Jupiter, Ceres, Sun, Mercury. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, Venus, Mars. One subtle switch in 2 of the bodies, but practically flawless. There's no doubt about it. That's the significance of this 420 years backwards from the destruction of the temple. Somebody in the mid-4th century said, okay, the temple's already been around since 516, say, BC. It's already been around for, over 150 years, easy. But somebody said, when we get to this particular alignment here, we're going to have precisely 420 cycles left to target the precise day when the temple is going to be destroyed. And the very fact that it hangs upon a conjunction pattern, which is practically identical to the pattern that Jesus states is the end of the world age via the destructive alignment, tells you straight out the connection here. Just as we have the end of the world age that Jesus talks about, we have the end of Judaism under the temple sacrifice system. Okay, the end of that is what is occurring there. It's the civilizational ending for Judaism as we know it. That's what it comes to an end. It's over. Okay, end of Judaism. It's over. That's what this is basically saying. Okay, so there's just one little final point to note here. And this is just after this. So these are the missing years for all the Jewish people out there might be interested. The missing years are these right here. It's between the 3rd day or the day, 3 days before the temple is completed, okay, which is 3 days before the 18th of February, 516 BC, okay, so it's the 15th, right? If you go from there and you go forwards 174 years to this alignment that occurs on the 16th of August, this is where the missing year period is. The 420 years is not the length of the actual temple itself from when it's completed to when it's destroyed. It's the length of time from that special alignment to when it's destroyed, okay? It was actually created in 516 BC. Now, just one final point then is that Jesus himself predicts the destruction of the Second Temple, literally to the day, by giving an updated prophecy regarding it, right? This is from John 2. And the Jews' Passover was at hand. So this is when Jesus goes to the temple and whips all the money changers and kicks them all out of the temple. And they're all really miffed about this. And they say to him, what sign showest thou unto us, seeing that thou doest these things? Yeah, can you justify your actions with an amazing sign? And Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And then it says, and the Jews said, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up again in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. He is talking, he's making a subtle reference to the end of age alignment. He knows there's a connection between the end of age alignment conjunction pattern and the destruction of the Second Temple. And he knows that this is not only the case for the 420-year connection, but to the date 46 years from when the temple is destroyed. So if we're here, okay, 70 AD, 3rd of August, and we go back 46 years, we end up on the 1st of April 25 AD, which is 14 Nisan under the Hebrew calendar. Now, what happens on 15 Nisan? Well, every Jew knows it's Passover Day, the very next day. And the reference to John was, and the Jews' Passover is at hand. Yeah, it's the very next day. So if you go back 46 cycles of 360 days from the destruction of the temple, you're 1 day before Passover in the year 25 AD, okay? Which means we have an optimum, a full moon. And if we look at the optimum of it, it's, again, about 8 hours or 7 hours, 55 minutes from 12 noon, again, still on the 1st of April. If we do what we did before and go to the center of the moon, we can see that the Earth and the Sun are aligned here, and at the optimum full moon, they target one of the stars of Aries, the Lamb of God. But let's have a look at more. Let's have a look at the top-down viewpoint. This is where we need to be very careful and look carefully. Right on this same day, we have an alignment of Jupiter, Venus, Sun, and Mars, and we also have Jupiter, Ceres, Mercury, Sun. What we essentially have is a merging of the two alignments that are going to occur at the end of age alignment. They're all merged, just so happen to be merged on this very day. Okay? And so let's just have a look from the top down, from the viewpoint of Jupiter down the line. You can see how close Sun, Mars, and Venus are, very accurate. Now, you'll see quite an offset. Ceres is somewhat to the left of the Sun, and Mercury is somewhat to the right. I'll come to that in a moment. But look at the top-down viewpoint here. This is the alignment then, 1st of April 25 AD we're looking at. And what we've got is Jupiter and Venus and Mars, along with the Sun, right? They're merged over the Sun. Here it's Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Again, the order is switched. Here they're separate from the Sun. Here they're merged with the Sun. And at this one, we've got Jupiter, Ceres, Sun, and Mercury here, okay? Just here. Here we've got Jupiter, Ceres, Mercury, Sun. So Mercury is like switched around the other side at the top point here. We also have the alignment of Earth, Venus, and Mercury, and Earth, Venus, and Mercury in both instances, okay? So what we've got is a subtle merging of the conjunction patterns right here, 46 cycles of 46 cycles of 360 days from when the temple is destroyed, merging of the alignments here. And if we again look down the line here, from Jupiter down here, you've got a special angular offset. You see, offset of Mercury to the left of the Sun is almost identical to the offset of Ceres to the left of the Sun is almost identical to the offset of Mercury to the other side. It's 1 degree 42 minutes of arc here, 1 degree 46 minutes of arc here. And if you look at the average is perfection over the Sun. And so this is one of these special equidistant relations. So Jesus obviously knew exactly when the end of age alignment was to occur, crucifixion day, and he also knew when the end of Judaism was going to come to an end, with the destruction of their temple and how it is prophetically tied in to this very same alignment pattern. And that is the end of the presentation, basically.
Wow, that is fascinating stuff. And I can't wait to have you back on, because there's so much more that I'd like you to discuss, especially how the elites can use this knowledge to sort of rule over us and seemingly predict events. These alignments have been known about, I guess, and taught to these bloodlines since the beginning of time. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes. There's a lot more alignments I can show you of a geopolitical kind of type. For example, the State of Israel was created 14th of May 1948. Jesus prophesies that as well. You can even show connections between terrorist atrocities and, between different events. I'll give you a little morsel here. I haven't got the slide ready, but that precise date I showed you for the destruction of the Jewish temple, the first one, Solomon's temple, right?
Right.
Have you ever heard of Bonfire Night? Do you know what that is? Over here in Britain.
No.
Bonfire Night. All right. Every year, 5th of November, right, everybody in Britain builds big bonfires and they throw an effigy of Guy Fawkes on it. It's like one of our celebration days. It's sort of like the 4th of July, Because in 1605, on the 5th of November, there was this big plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament, right? And this guy, Guy Fawkes, along with some conspirators, he snuck 36 barrels of gunpowder into Parliament, and he was hidden with it, with the fuse and everything, on the 4th of November, and he was going to blow up Parliament on the 5th of November the next day, at the state opening of Parliament, when the King was going to be there, everybody was anybody. So it was most incredible plot to blow up the entire Parliament, right? If you actually look at the 5th of November, 1605, the total number of days between that event and the precise day when the Jewish temple was destroyed is exactly 800,000 days dead on. And I mean dead on, not one day more, not one day less. You will find that a lot of the great events that people set in motion, they will attempt them on certain special days. They might not be successful. Like Guy Fawkes wasn't successful. He was captured before he could blow up Parliament. But the Jewish temple was destroyed. And so you'll find connections like that, numerological connections between events to do with when wars start, when people die, prominent people like kings, queens, presidents, and even peace treaties. So they're tied into the same mathematics as the cycles that target world age alignments as well.
Very good. And before you head out, just give everyone your website so they can look at your work.
Oh, yeah, my website is Occult Physics, and that's my book, Occult Physics, and my website is... It's right there, occultphysics.com, all one word. So if people want to go there, this actually looks at some of the ideal cycles. It looks at some of the secret physics of nuclear weapons, in particular, some of the stuff that I've not really gone into, some of the relations, the global relations of nuclear weapons. It's very esoteric stuff, and the placement of secret military bases, because they actually place their secret bases like the Menwith Hill and the Pine Gap facility. They site them globally according to the same physical principles as were used, to site the megalithic monuments like Stonehenge. So I look at that kind of area in my book there, but you can get that via my website, occultphysics.com. So
I will leave a link to that in my description. And thank you so much again for coming on today. That was great, fascinating information, and we'll have to have you back on very soon.
Okay, then. All right. Thank you.
You have a good day.